In a world where the Planetside roadmap is dim, random videos offer unwanted advice. For this crucial task, I've assembled a team of keyboard warriors, Newell Gaben, and the development team behind Life Half Dose. Oh, disclaimer, fair use, review critique, okay. As a sequel to Redeploying of the Profitable Casual, we bring you HalfTeamSidePlanet, Incentivisms of Financial Fanboying. Since in the prequel I recommended resource boosts and vehicle bundles, relabeling of bundle text, NS firearm bundles, and the introduction of a Valkyrie bundle, all of which have come to pass, I hope my advice is considered useful. This video will focus on answering the question, how do you incentivize financial fanboying, akin to that achieved by Valve's titles Half-Life 2 and Team Fortress 2. Now, despite what many on forums say, no single issue of weapon class or vehicle balance is wholly responsible for the game's finance and population. The underlying issue is incentive: to try the game, to play the game, to share the game, pay for things in the game, and who better to consult on incentive than the development team behind Half-Life 2 and Team Fortress 2.
Saw blades were a prominent weapon in Half-Life 2, and we wanted the player to recognize them as part of their arsenal in the upcoming warehouse battle. After watching several playtesters ignore them completely, we decided to add the zombie pin to the wall. Most players pull out the saw blade and instantly realize its potential for destruction. After that, they tend to find and use saw blades without further prompting.
Let's start with communication. I made a fresh character to film the tutorial, to critique shortcomings of faction integration and the basics, and after having the target dummies bug out and remaking the character to get a functional tutorial, I constantly had several voices playing at the same time, garbling most dialogue, and some referencing outdated mechanics.
Your weapons are just as dangerous to your teammates as they are to the infantry. So it is essential you learn how to identify.
Team Fortress 2 tutorials clearly explain class utility. Players are given simple, step-by-step instructions and visual demonstrations. In Planetside 2, they're largely non-functional or non-existent, and the closest to a class tutorial is a recommendation to try them in the firing range and one-line overviews. Team Fortress 2 tutorials remain present for reuse in the event of returning players in need of a brush-up. Planetside 2 offers a reset option for pop-up hints in the interface menu, which those that need it probably don't know exists. Planetside 2's tutorial goes over the most basic info, like the need to capture points in overload generators and character movement. It states Sunderers can be equipped with the ability to act as a mobile spawn point, instead of correctly stating this is now a default feature, and doesn't show what a Sunderer looks like. Compared to Team Fortress 2, where you use the equipment. The tutorial at no point references the VR training area, weapon trials, or the use of the depot to obtain new items or cosmetics. In order to receive the basic VR help pop-up, a player must first travel to it. Some tips and vague references to the internet exist during load screens, but not in the tutorial, nor are aircraft included at all. Because of poor tutorial quality, it takes a while for players to start doing things. Budget players will be hesitant to make purchases via not knowing what things do or how effective they are, and for items like heavy assault shields, they're essentially untestable even with the VR. This encourages currency hoarding. Communicating they have starting equipment but can and should try new items at the VR as well as trial them is a point that should be clearly communicated, in addition to the trial system revisions that I went over in the prequel, so it's worth using in the first place, and will address again later. I sometimes still find people that just discovered the trial. Joe Schmo McFirst FPS doesn't understand the innate features common in shooters, and, come Cold Tier, if these issues aren't addressed, he'll lose useful advice in Yell Chat as he spends 15 levels with people that can offer limited info unless he hangs on the main continents. Assuming he even discovers Cold Tier at all, as if he's not sent there fresh from the tutorial and follows instant action around, he may entirely avoid it. There is useful information online from Rel's channel, and numerous smaller ones, an FPS veteran can locate these easily, but the new guy won't know to take that initiative, and the denizens of Cold Tier won't help much. Cold Tier claims to have exclusive missions aimed at helping new players. So, I installed the test server client and looked at Cold Tier's missions while switching between classes. I only received missions to overload generators or capture points, not even receiving a mission to repair a destroyed terminal when I went engineer. If that's the new missions, A, they're not exclusive, B, they're less useful than normal missions, C, missions offer no experience reward to incentivize completion, and may go entirely unnoticed as most people probably ignore them. Despite the apparent hype train, I'm concerned unless systems to assist new players are improved, it'll drive some away via cutting their resources. You can't sell weapons to people fiddling with the options menu. The latest patch did implement some directives for new players to help people find their footing, and that's a great step in the right direction, but it's not enough on its own.
Before we simplified the path through the Guardian's lair, we allowed a right turn at this junction, leading the player right back to where they began. One of our playtesters continued to repeatedly turn right here for half an hour. That was a compelling argument for removing the maze-like elements.
If smaller continents are going to be designed, I'd probably head for an eventual continent lattice rather than a beginner continent that will feed them to the sharks once they're kicked out. The game runs on a free-to-play, wide-scale model, depending on large populations, so if free players aren't paying, they provide gameplay for paying customers, meat for the grinder, bodies to shoot. To that end, I would propose the reintroduction of recruiter friend rewards. The game's previous attempt could only be called a delusion of grandeur, and its poor design probably lost a lot of revenue, compared to League of Legends and World of Warcraft. League discovered most players would struggle to get up to 5 referred friends to pass level 10, much less buy things. They eventually made a simpler refer a friend incarnation, and even that is being shut down for poor performance, an incentive to smurf to get rewards. PS2 expected, for the top-level reward of a helmet, decal, and 6-month boost, a $250 minimum buy-in spread out over 25 people. The expectation League is shutting down is multiplied by 5, and put behind a paywall where an account must pay $10 to count as recruited. Believing a substantial number of seasoned veterans will use the recruit system and get $10 buy-ins in return for a one-day boost that really only lasts a couple hours is a delusion, as is believing such a short span is sufficient to get a new player on their feet, as the new player care package claimed it was. From a business standpoint, if I were managing an investment and asked about population growth plans and was shown PS2's old recruit system, that would kill the business deal. I'd be concerned the person who came up with it lied about their credentials. League learned directly incentivizing spending time with another player, had better results, and is moving to methods akin to that. I'd relaunch the RAF system under the modus operandi of offering direct rewards for investing in new players, offer a mutual passive XP boost of 15% that activates whenever squatted with a recruited friend, and structure mentorship and guidance incentives and rewards accordingly. Rip off MMOs further with the if your recruit buys 2 on subscription, you get a month of premium membership routine. Bump the expectations for number of referrals as well as paid referrals to realistic 1 to 5 levels, set the rewards accordingly, throw more diverse rewards in, and consider the validity of a system for split vehicle cost and related improvements to push the objective of playing with the recruit. I could create a list of ideas, but you get the idea, so moving on. Before we discuss balance, there's something important first. Vision. There's no shortage of people with suggestions. What's often not included is disclosure about the direction they want the game to move in, and how a change is meant to impact that goal. So on that subject, let's talk about Redeploy Side. This was a part of the prequel video, but I'd like to provide some context to current issues the game faces. To truly fix Redeploy Side, it's important to understand how it came to be. What I'm showing you is footage from the PS2 beta in 2012. The battlefield dynamic was very different, as was base capture. Originally, there wasn't a lattice system. Any base could be attacked at any time, and bordering territory altered the speed of capture, but due to mass dispersion, there were few real battles. This was changed to a border system where a base could be attacked if it was touching enemy territory. However, there were many smaller territories, and practically speaking, dozens of bases would be vulnerable at a time, so the problem persisted. SCUs and shield generators could originally be destroyed with bullets and explosives. Biolabs had entrance points above the dome and motor pool, and spawn beacons were a utility item anyone could plant for 100 resources. But because dozens of bases were vulnerable and large battles were still uncommon, concession after concession was made to stall base captures, increase the speed reinforcements could arrive at a base, and support the border system. Reinforcements needed existed to rapidly send troops to these many bases. SCUs and shield generators were placed behind layers of shields and made unkillable with bullets or explosives, requiring a manual trigger followed by countdown timer, with many smaller bases having their SCU deleted and being permanently able to field reinforcements. The spawn beacon was made squad leader only to mitigate its offensive use, and these other entry points to biolabs were blocked to slow the speed a biolab could be captured. Sometime later, the lattice system was implemented, but these concessions that were made to hold up the border system were left in the game and never reverted. So, reinforcements needed became capable of dropping dozens of troops at an individual base in a matter of seconds, and those bases were nearly guaranteed to avoid losing the SCU beforehand if it had one at all. Biolabs became much harder to capture, and spawn beacons for squad leaders only kept organized platoons hopping from continent to continent easy, but public requests for reinforcements attacking a base a lot less common. And that's the story of how Redeploy Side, as it is known today, came to be. This changed how battles progressed and affected class roles, so it's important to keep that in mind when discussing balance. One of the hot topics these days is the heavy assault, generally one side claiming it's overpowered, the other usually claiming it's designed to be the combat soldier, and if it's better at killing things and is more competitive, it's simply doing its job. While that may be what the class warped into, that certainly wasn't the original intention, and designing a class in a competitive FPS to be the most competitive class is rather silly. However, I wouldn't agree with the nerf bat mentality. I find when dealing with two extremes, the truth often lies somewhere in the middle. The medkit should be fixed, but I consider that a bug. Originally, heavy assaults lacked the mobility or stealth to hit objectives easily, leaving that role to light assaults and infiltrators. They were the slower, tougher foot soldier that pushed up a hill or came in drop pods once beacons were down. Originally, light assaults were standard infantry. Every new player started as one, and trailers depicted them that way. They acted as a shock trooper to plant beacons, hunt beacons, destroy base objectives, and hold off those coming to repair for friendly reinforcements to arrive, with infiltrators partially sharing this role. But when base objectives were placed behind overload requirements and spawn beacons became squad leader only, this role was effectively deleted. Getting to a generator, overloading it, and guarding it for several minutes during a large battle with numerous defenders was virtually impossible for a small light assault or infiltrator group, but neither was given new objectives to replace these, which caused something of an identity crisis for both classes. You might still find old threads complaining about that if you fancy some archaeology in the LA or infiltrator forums. Infiltrators mostly just sniped until submachine guns were added, and light assaults turned to destroying tanks, and infantry farming since their primary role was never reinstated. Several light assault and infiltrator cert lines were also removed before launch. When this tactical paradigm changed, the heavy assault gradually became the standard infantry due to the lack of value other roles had in comparison, and newer players never knew what happened. I remember seeing a thread about a Sunder that would block enemy spawn room use, which was hailed as a potential step forward for the game, seemingly unaware this mechanic existed previously. I invite you to look at heavy assault balance from a new perspective. Consider how many tool slot options they have. Various rocket launchers for both air and ground. Compare this to the Infiltrator's 2 tool options, the Medic's 1, and the Light Assault's 0. Thus my recommendation is not to nerf bat heavy assaults, but to finish other long-standing issues, firstly by reverting the changes that were made to accommodate the border system now that those changes are holding up redeploy side, which will also reinstate the primary roles light assaults and infiltrators had, and ease some of the whining about C4. The objectives can be immune if the base is isolated by the lattice, and if necessary, spawn beacons can be given a few tweaks such as a price increase if overuse becomes an issue once it's back to the utility slot. But overall, the changes should benefit the game. I was a lot more prone to join squads when I didn't have to plea for leader to be passed to me. Following that, some gear and equipment revisions, vehicle buffs, and a business model overhaul based off of Team Fortress 2. PS2's free-to-play model requires its balance and sales to be handled differently than options that would be available in, say, Battlefield. Applying massive nerfs to a single class or vehicle isn't a valid option because of the business model. People invest hundreds of hours and possibly hundreds of dollars into specific roles. To suddenly reduce the value of a role dilutes the investment. In a Battlefield game, some people complain a little when the next iteration makes a dramatic change to a class, but few actually leave over it. You play Team Deathmatch for 4 hours, and you've unlocked every non-firearm gear item for every class again. 4 hours in PS2 doesn't have that result, so the investment in a role is higher. So, without further ado, here's my list. I'd like to curtail medic abuse by switching their points to a royalty system, cutting the points from a revive in half, but causing the revived player to generate assist points when they do things until they die or have generated 3 times the original revive value, so 225 XP non-boosted. Healing will work in this way as well, awarding a smaller assist pool, but sufficient to encourage actually healing people. These changes are designed to invest the medic in keeping people alive and active, rather than chasing corpses for revive points on a target that will die moments later. My long-term goal for medics would be to add combat boosts and stim packs they can use on teammates, and the development of chemical items that deal damage over time or disorientation effects, such as virus grenades and the potential return of the nanovirus applicator if feasible. I'd like to buff tank composite armor by merging the 3 composites into one, and adding more ranks that boost it up to 20%, so that composite armor is competitive with vehicle stealth and proximity radar, as currently vehicle stealth is the unanimous defense slot item, unless you're in severe ambush terrain, and even then stealth may still be better, so your teammates are attacked instead of you. My long-term goal for tanks would be redesigning them to center around skill, by which I mean buffing their armor plates so they have more survivability when fighting out in the open, but take more damage from precision hits. 2 C4 on the frontal armor plates fail to kill it, but 1 on the rear engine block would cause permanent burning, and 2 on the back half would destroy it, or a grenade thrown down the top hatch will kill the crew. The tank would also receive turret slot utility options, specifically the choice between a point laser defense system that can be activated for a few seconds, a coaxial secondary weapon for the driver, or a locked hatch to prevent grenade attack. The purpose of these changes is to make crippling tanks easier with more skill, but harder and more expensive with less skill. For aircraft, I'd like them to get a similar composite armor buff, and I saw an idea on the forum I actually thought was excellent about fighters dropping supply crates for some points. I think performing airdrops in a support role is a great way to help people learn how to fly and make points with air vehicles, so I think the airdrop module should take the slot of a weapon and reduce the price of the vehicle in the case of a fighter. Fighters being able to drop crates and flashes, Valkyries dropping a harasser or 2 crates, and so on. The drop request beacon would be a utility slot item for all classes, and capable of requesting transportation to a location or a supply drop, which would appear on the continent map for someone flying with a relevant module, similar to how reinforcement requests appear. Repairing drop items could be switched or rearmed at an air vehicle pad, and performing the requested drop awards delivery XP and a small stream of assist points when the vehicle is used to do something or someone who resupplies from a supply drop does something, up until 3 times the delivery XP. A successful delivery destroys the request beacon, and a new one needs to be placed for additional requests. For vehicles, the pilot wouldn't pay the resources, but the vehicle would be distinctly marked as unclaimed, and would obtain the loadout of the first person who enters it by pressing the claim key, default bound to the use key. This player is the one that pays the nanites to spawn it, and cannot claim it without the nanites for the vehicle. Vehicles despawn after 1 minute unclaimed, and the pilot can't drop a second vehicle while one is unclaimed. For coding simplicity, when the aircraft does the drop, the vehicle spawns under it with temporarily nulled inertia and collision damage, and the delivery XP value would scale up or down for the area. Friendly territory protected by lattice offers little, contested areas with many enemies award bonus XP, etc. One thing about Planetside 2 is, with a war going on, there's a clear need for logistics to be important, but also a need to avoid devolving the game into truck simulator. I think this system could be simple enough to fit in, and help address some issues with flight in general, and help boost and train the flying population. I'd also like a cloak module for the Valkyrie, occupying its weapon slot, the intent being making the Valkyrie transport requests for infiltrator insertion more common via the beacon. On the subject of infiltrators, some anti-infiltration mechanics seem deliberate, such as terminals being placed behind pain fields. If the devs intend to leave infiltrators unemployed, then they need free hobo cosmetics and looking for work cardboard signs to carry around. Presently, they do little actual infiltrating because it's time-consuming and unrewarding. Their cloaking abilities are better compared to active camo and should probably be relabeled as they carry numerous sandbags. Humans are pattern-seeking mammals, with 2 forward-facing eyes for depth perception. Sudden movements and changes produce alarm and attract attention. Cloak mechanics are largely illiterate to this, and often give away your position rather than concealing it. Idle motion when holding still makes freezing in front of some backgrounds noticeable instead of blending, and turning to look around risky. Dramatic and sudden shifts in cloak visibility while shifting speed or stance are eye-catching, instead of slow or more gradual fade-ins and fade-outs. Cloak sounds are loud, obnoxious, and can echo in an open field, and there's a lack of diversity in equipment. I motion for a new scout rifle, inspired by Ghost Inspectors from StarCraft. Worse for close quarters than submachine guns, and worse for sniping than sniper rifles, it functions in the middle by offering utility. It has a 10-round magazine and fires fully automatic, but has a limited ammo pool. You can get an extended mag to 20, but it's still not as good as a submachine gun. However, the new scout rifle has scopes that allow you to spot things while zoomed, without shouting out loud, and without giving a proximity text cue. It also has laser target and designation attachments and the like, and less of a spotting penalty or cooldown. It can have an alternate fire mode ripped from the underbarrel carbine weapons that's a sniper rifle that fires a shot that can one-hit kill to the head, like a normal bolt action, but requires reload after each shot and only has a total of 10 rounds. They'd also receive an actual cloaking device option that starts with low energy on spawn-in, charges very slowly, that this can be upgraded, is quieter, less visible, lasts 2 minutes if fully charged, but has a 6-second decloak process that blocks firing. I'd also like them to get a cloaking bubble tool that provides cloak to stationary infantry in a small radius if not firing. Haywire grenades for triggering gate shield diffusion and allowing bypass of certain barriers, additional hacking options such as sabotaging terminals to spawn vehicles with tracking devices or explode the terminal on next use, a grappling hook tool, and a haywire mine that can be strapped to a vehicle over a 4-second planting process to disable it and eject the occupant. This is designed to go hand in hand with logistics upgrades of the prequel video and making said logistical tools operate out of a logistics module sunderer that has a big antenna on it, and allows for operation in a large radius, and assassinating the person in it, offering a large assassination bonus and temporarily freezing their logistics abilities. This is to give infiltration some viable strategic use and point gain. For light assaults, I'd like their default tool slot to be a grappling hook, allowing hanging in one place on a wall, and clinging to vehicles without taking collision damage. The Infiltrator version would do this as well, as those two classes share several roles and correspondingly some equipment. Light assaults would have binoculars as a tool slot option for spotting and laser target designation, as opposed to being able to take it with a primary weapon like infiltrators can. This will mean both light assaults and infiltrators can perform advanced recon duties, but excel at doing them in different ways. Now that the speed of the Icarus jump jet and the corresponding reason it was originally removed have supposedly been fixed, I'd like the original version, even if renamed to accommodate the existing Icarus, to be put back in, and I'd like the development focus on these two classes to focus on more equipment items that perform differently. For the light assault, I'd like a jetpack option that allows carrying more explosives at the cost of having no area damage, and doing 0 damage to a vehicle if not planted directly on it. The reason I think focus should be on equipment and gear is there's a lot of weapons currently that compete directly with each other in terms of role, and redesign and relaunch of those weapons is probably cheaper than making new ones for a while. If you're TR and looking for a carbine, you use the Jaguar unless you're grinding Araxiums. If you're Vanu, it's Pulsar C from medium to long, and Pulsar C only. They're not the only carbines, but a lot of weapons are not competitive. Intricate balancing of weapon stats is very easy to mess up. The slightest error may render a weapon that seemed like a good idea inferior right off the bat. Anyone who's reviewed guns in PS2 can tell you that. Ask Rel about the original Spiker, I go Rar about the battle rifle, me about the original Cerberus. Spoiler alert, it was brainworms. Don't Google that. It's one of the reasons I didn't like the paper doll inventory and wanted one where items had weight and such. Even if one is inferior to another, by adjusting a weight stat you can cheaply and easily redefine an item's value without altering its combat performance.
But once the cow's been milked, there's no squirting the cream back up her udder, so here we are to see things through.
Which brings me to the business model. You didn't think I forgot about the financial point of the video, did you? Team Fortress 2 gets away with selling everything. Everything can be purchased, even items that are direct upgrades to default loadouts. But there's a reason they get away with it. Any equipment that's more useful than default gear is either small in terms of the bonus it provides, easily traded for, easily crafted under common quality items, or a combination thereof. Gear is also cheap, ranging from $1 to $2.50 most of the time. That's not true for Planetside 2. What would help the game financially is if these equipment, gear, upgrades, abilities, etc. were monetized like heavy assault rocket launchers and could be purchased with real money. Unfortunately, the game would rightfully be called pay-to-win if this were implemented in its current state due to the massive amount of cert investment required to make a vehicle or kit competitive. The recent 2300 cert Sunday Cloak is a perfect microcosm of this. If you don't have thousands of certs to fill out something, you're disadvantaged when using it. This causes people to greedily hoard their certs like Smog on his treasure on the off chance one day they need it for something. Fortunately, the cert hoarding, cert inflation, revenue increase, and fix to pay-to-win can be done in 3 relatively simple steps. First, the trial system overhaul. I touched on this in the prequel video, but it basically needs to function more like a free character rotation for a Dota game, since progression is vertical. The trial system needs to be included in the tutorial. Weapon trials need to last days and include all attachments, and there need to be separate trials for abilities and equipment items. This way, a new player will be able to trial a weapon, ability, suit slot, etc., and consistently have access to a competitive setup for a class or vehicle, even if he has to switch between what that setup is on a regular basis. This will make pay-to-win effectively impossible, and make the game much more friendly to newer players, while easing the cert hoarding problem. Second, cosmetics need to be purchasable with between 500 to 1500 certs, and it'd also help if they were easier to sort and search through from a browsing standpoint. This is to help deflate certs from people that have way too many, and to avoid making free players feel like items are completely out of reach to them. Third, most of the massive cert sinks in infantry abilities, and especially vehicle upgrades, since the pilot fronts the whole expense most of the time, need a price slash of between 25 to 50%, leaning more on 50, coinciding with allowing them to be purchased with money. Most of the upgrades should be between $1 and $3 to max out. Because of the current cert hoarding, a player will cling onto their mound of certs for fear that one day they might need a Sunderer cloak, and will be unwilling to drop thousands of certs to try out a vehicle. But they can much more easily dip $10 to $15 on a bundle of weapons and upgrades to try one. These 3 changes would allow all content to be monetized without making it pay to win, and while making it a lot more friendly to new players, accessible to free players, and significantly increasing the value and diversity of bundle sales. And as a final point, before I conclude, a word of caution about fanboys. The fanboy will defend the game against anything. Anything. including items previously in the game or items in the game the fanboy isn't aware of. The life cycle of the fanboy is to fanboy out about a game and gradually segue into fanboying about another game with no responsibility taken for anything I participated in before or after. Most gaming forums can be summed up in 5 seconds.
No one should have to suffer the way I suffered.
I'm not commenting on the upcoming Ant and Apparent resource revamp in this video due to the very limited information being available on it at this time, but let's not look at the past through rose-tinted goggles. The original resource system made people abandon continents that were warp-gated due to it taking hours to get resources for a vehicle, and that effect was popularly declared a useful feature when I criticized it in 2013. I've been playing my Emerald VS character more recently and have more vehicle kills than shotgun kills on my light assault, but that couldn't possibly qualify me on some vehicle weaknesses. Personally, I think the massive vehicle cert syncing is what largely creates the anti-competitive attitudes I've seen in the Planetside community, and hopefully that'll die down when the prices are more reasonable. The point is, many of these issues I've pointed out in this video have been present for a long time. The trial system's been insufficient since launch, and I could have made a video like this shortly after the lattice was put in, but I never had the time for a video this long. Pretty much any change you do, no matter how benevolent, will be reeled against by those that don't comprehend it, which is why I based the advice in this video off of not only my credentials, but those of various other successful titles. Make of it what you will. And I'll see you next time.